Hello, welcome to my newest video, Statistics Overview, Preparation for College Level Statistics. In this video, I plan to show you quite a few things about statistics at a high level, just to help ease your mind as you enter your doctoral journey. First of all, I want you to know that it's okay to be nervous about statistics. Most people are. I teach quantitative methods, and I can tell you that a good bit of my time in this class is spent just talking people off the edge, because it's overwhelming at first to think, oh my goodness, I'm in a class at a PhD level that's statistics. I'm not good at math, or it's been a long time, or maybe you haven't ever had a statistics class. I just want you to know that it's okay. So please calm down and know that your school is preparing you for this journey. You're not expected to know everything about statistics, or really much of anything about statistics going into the process. In fact, part of the application process into a PhD program is to make sure that you have that analytical mind. I remember hiring people in my quality assurance department, and I wanted to hire people with that innate curiosity, that desire to analyze things, to do research, because I can teach the tools. And that's really what colleges want too. They don't want you coming in knowing how to do all the statistics. They want you to just have that desire, that innate curiosity. They can teach the rest. So in this class, or in this video, we'll go through a little bit more of the information about statistics, so you can feel like you've at least dipped your toe in the water. With this, also just know that your classes are set up. I'll show you on the next slide. They're set up strategically to help you. There are other resources. I'm part of Facebook groups that help with dissertations and PhD analysis, those sorts of things. So be patient with yourself. Give yourself permission to not know everything, and ask questions. Ask your professor, ask in some of these help groups if you want to, get a tutor if you need to, but first of all, just ask your professors. And as you go through the program, you'll probably find some professors that you like more than others, that you can really relate to and find that their information is good. Hopefully it's timely. They get back to you quickly. So as an example, I want you to see the curriculum plan, the academic degree plan for Regent University, and you'll see that it's very strategic. You'll have exegetical research methods, you'll have quantitative methods and qualitative methods, and then an advanced analysis class. So you have several classes learning how to do research. Again, you don't need to know everything getting started. Each one of these classes, there's a beginner class and then a more advanced class. So that's why there's 2 of each, and then 758 is a more advanced class. And there's plenty of textbooks that we'll review in this video too. But take a look at your degree plan and just make sure that you're going to have all of the support that you need. In this example, you have quite a bit of support to help you learn all that you need to know about statistics. So what is PhD research or statistics all about? Well, it's theory-based. It's also practical-based. We want to make sure that it's theory-based, meaning you're looking in academic journals, scholarly level material to see what are other people doing with research. The doctoral level is always theory-based, meaning we're not just doing research for the sake of doing research. We're doing research because it matters. And that's what I love so much about research at the PhD level. We can look at a phenomenon and figure out why is this happening? And what can I do to help solve this problem or understand this better? So that's really that doctoral level theory-based research. There needs to be a logical reason for the research. And as you read more and more journal articles, you'll see that at the bottom of the articles, it talks about recommendations for future research. That's key. Again, look at the bottom of those articles for recommendations for future research, because that is key to help you know what the next step needs to be. And any of those that you like, that you become excited about, or curious about, you can use that for a future project. Your research needs to contribute to the knowledge of that field. So in organizational leadership, all of my research contributes to that field. I'm looking at journal articles that revolve around organizational behavior or people in the workplace, and I'm trying to either fill a gap or extend the field of research. And what that means is, let's say there's a phenomenon going on in the workplace and I want to see why it's happening. If I look in the literature and I don't see anything that describes that, then I'm filling a gap. But if I do the research and I do find other articles that talk about this experience that people are having, then I can extend the field of research, again, by looking at the bottom of that article to see what are the recommendations for future research. Also, the doctoral level research should include practical implications, especially organizational leadership, because we're not just doing it for the sake of publishing, we're doing it for the sake of helping others. And in the workplace, we want them to know how to improve engagement or how to improve commitment or satisfaction or how to improve their culture, any of those types of desired workplace outcomes. So our research does matter. We need to help the reader know how they will use it, what their next steps are. Overall, there's two basic types of statistics. You have qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is usually the first type of statistics used when developing a theory. And if you think about it this way, with a theory, let's say servant leadership theory, it wasn't something that just magically appeared and all of the parameters were set in place. At first, Robert Greenleaf, who developed the servant leadership theory, he had to witness that phenomenon, watch as people served one another, as they loved one another, as they were humble. He had to experience all of this in doing interviews and observations, which is your qualitative research. And then as time goes on, more and more people join this effort and they start to develop instruments around those constructs. And so that's where we start to get quantitative research. Quantitative is more replicable. We can use those same instruments over and over again and get similar results, or not. That's part of the testing process. The purpose of statistics is to make sure we do have that scientific proof. We want to have provable facts with logic and an organized structure of analysis. With this scientific proof, you probably hear a lot of people talk about the statistics say this or they say that. But if you dig into it, you realize it's not valid or reliable information. So all of our research at the PhD level needs to be valid and reliable. It's empirical evidence, which means it's proof measured by observation, documentation, and experimentation. You'll hear the words empirical articles. And those are the articles that we read in the academic library that are peer reviewed. So it's not good enough that I just do some research and throw it out there. The research that's published is actually peer reviewed to make sure that it's of good quality, that it has robust methodology practices behind it. And like I said earlier, replicable. We want to make sure that the research that we do can be repeated. So as you work out your research design, we are basically doing a recipe of how we're going to do the research. And then once it's finished and published, other people could do that same type of research and hopefully get similar results. Let's dig in a little bit more to the different types of qualitative research. There's grounded theory, which is really the baseline of developing a theory. It's where you have lots of participants, you do interviews, focus groups, open-ended surveys, those types of things, and you use coding. We'll talk about coding in a minute. Case studies are usually with one person, and maybe you have a lot of case studies or just one, but it's one person, and we're looking at their interviews, documents, reports, and observations about a certain situation. Phenomenological is where participants describe a certain phenomenon. Again, we could use interviews, observations, and surveys. The ethnographic is an immersion into an unfamiliar culture. One of my favorite books is called Nickel and Dimed in America. And it's where a lady, a researcher, actually took a bus pass, went to an area of town, and became homeless for a period of time, a long period of time, so that she could learn about what it's like to be homeless. She got a job as a waitress. She tried to make ends meet. She didn't have enough money. All those things because she moved into an unfamiliar location and completely immersed herself. So that's ethnographic. Historical is examining past events to anticipate future choices, and that too could include interviews, surveys, and documents. And then the narrative is more of a story. It's examining individual stories to understand a larger event. Again, interviews and documents. So you'll see that the interviews, documents, observations, those are all pretty consistent with qualitative. There's two other types of qualitative that include the Bible, and those are hermeneutical and exegetical. The interpretation of the Bible, you can also use these methods with pretty much any written content. Basically, you're doing an analysis to find out why was this written, who was it written to, what was going on when it was written, those sorts of things. Okay, so these books are pretty popular with qualitative methods. The first one, Qualitative Methods in Social Work Research by Deborah Paget. Case Study Research by Robert Yen. Michael Patton has a great book on qualitative research and evaluation methods. I use this one quite a bit. It helps me to know how many people I need in my study, amongst many other things. The Hermeneutical Spiral by Osborne. Exegetical Analysis by Henson, Crowther, and Heising. And Phenomenological Research Methods by Moustakis. All of these books are phenomenal books. They're really great with any type of qualitative research that we've covered so far. And they'll give you the specifics down to how many people that you need to have in your study, how to go about doing your study, and those sorts of things. So other tools that you need with qualitative research could be coding tools like Atlas TI, Max QDA, and NVivo. And just as an extra bonus, as far as how many people you need in your study, it usually requires saturation, meaning you continue to do your qualitative research with focus groups, surveys, interviews, those sorts of things, observations, until you start getting the same information over and over again. You're saturated. So there's not a finite number that we need to have. We just need to go till we get saturation. Moving into quantitative, a lot of people look at that as those are the numbers behind the research. And with quantitative, it's a little more scientific in that you usually are using instruments, surveys, or questionnaires to figure out how variables relate to one another or predict one another. Some of the common tests that we use are listed on this slide: t-tests, ANOVA, correlation, and regression. There are other tests, but these are the popular ones. And truly, these are the steps you go through. If I'm going to do a regression test, I still need to do t-test, ANOVA, and correlation. The t-test is to look to see if there's a significant difference between the means of two groups. The ANOVA, also the analysis of variance, we're looking at 3 or more groups. And you could look at a one-way ANOVA, a two-way ANOVA, or a three-way ANOVA. That's way more information than you need for this video. And the multiple analysis of variance is looking at relationships between 2 or more dependent variables, where the others was looking at independent variables. The correlation is just simply, is there a relationship between 2 variables? And if so, we can do regression analysis to see what the predictive power is of that. So, for example, one of the research projects that I did used a new instrument. It was brand new, just developed using the fruit of the spirit. So independent variables such as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, those sorts of things, to see if they could predict employee engagement, job satisfaction, and organizational commitment. So I used the t-test to see how the means worked out. I used the ANOVA. I used the correlation to look at the relationship. I was surprised that all of them did relate. And then the regression told me which ones were more significant with their predictive power. As far as tools with quantitative methods, SPSS is the most common academic tool to actually do the analysis. And then SurveyMonkey is a pretty popular tool. You could also use Google Forms. Qualtrics is another one that you can use that will let you develop your surveys and send it out to people. So those three are pretty common tools. Some of the books that we use in quantitative methods, the SPSS Survival Manual by Julie Pallant. I absolutely love this book. It gives you step-by-step information on how to do the analysis. Everything from your t-test to your regression, it gives you exactly that step-by-step guide in SPSS, and it also helps you to interpret the results. Cosby and Bates is another popular book. There's quite a few pieces of good information that I see in the dissertations that I read where people are quoting from Cosby and Bates, so that's a very popular book. Another one is the book by Hare, and the other is the Multivariate Data Analysis. All three of these, I see them quoted over and over and over again in the quantitative dissertations that I'm a part of. So some basic components that could be used for qualitative and quantitative are your research questions. Your research question is just that. It's what are you trying to solve for? And research questions are so helpful because they put those boundaries up so that you don't go off on a tangent or spiral out of control with your research. You need those boundaries so that you're not wasting time and you're being very purposeful. So it identifies the variables under construction. It identifies who you're examining, what population, and it implies the possibility of empirical testing. So again, we're not just doing research for the sake of research. Your research question needs to have some theory around it. Your propositions are just that. They're propositions. They are generally used instead of a hypothesis in the process of theory building. It suggests a link between two concepts and doesn't rely on testable data. It's basically saying, well, I think this could be causing that. And after that proposition, then you can start the testing with hypotheses. But at first, in theory building, it's very abstract with this could be happening because of that. So they're proposing, they're assuming that these things are happening. With hypotheses, you'll notice that hypothesis is singular, hypotheses is plural. You're clearly stating the variables of your research, and the variables need to match the subscales of your instrument, and I'll show you an instrument here shortly. You clearly record the population being studied, and you also clearly state the predicted outcome. And sometimes you don't need a null hypothesis. So check to see if you need one or not. A lot of different fields of study don't use them. I know with ours, with organizational leadership, we do not need the null hypothesis. And your different variables. You have an independent variable, which is also called a predictor variable. You have a dependent variable, which could be criterion or outcome variable. So in my research with the fruit of the spirit and employee engagement, the fruit of the spirit was my predictor variable. So love was predicting employee engagement. Joy was predicting employee engagement. So the fruits were the independent variables. The dependent variables were that desired outcome in the workplace. You also could have moderating variables and mediating variables. These are a little bit more advanced, so I wouldn't expect you to use these early in your program. But your moderating is your intervention variable. So perhaps you do a pre-test and then you do an intervention or a training. And that training could be your moderating variable. And then you do a post-test to see, did the training have an impact on your participants? Let's say you were training on servant leadership. And so your moderating variable would be that training. The mediating relationship or mediating variable explains the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. And that could be a variety of things, but that's usually not a variable that is intervening. It's not changing, it's just there. It's consistent. Your control variables are also a constant. They may or may not influence the test results and should be based on empirical research. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people pick just at random that age and gender are control variables. But you want to go back to your scholarly articles to see in other research that was done on your specific research topic, let's say employee engagement, did they have control variables? And if they did, and they were actually connected, if they were related, then you want to include those in your test too. It could be their salary, it could be their religious preference, it could be their ethnicity, all sorts of control variables. And these aren't just demographic variables, they are control variables. For example, if I am doing a survey on a wide group, a random survey, and I have people all over the world, I may find that people in different parts of the world have different value systems based off of their religious training. So I'm not necessarily testing to see if religion can predict employee engagement, but that religion could be, or their ethnicity could be, a control variable. So we want to just do the research to see what we need there. There are three basic experimental designs. You have experimental, quasi-experimental, and non-experimental. The experimental is what you would normally think of a research project. It includes an intervention, a control group, and random selection of participants. There are strict controls so that we can make sure it's very scientific. The quasi-experimental includes the intervention, but it's not random, so it's more difficult to really examine or measure the cause and effect. And then the non-experimental is also called a correlation method. It looks at two or more variables to see if they're related. So most of my research is an experimental research design. We also could look at cross-sectional and longitudinal. And part of this research design, so you'd basically have both. I have the experimental cross-sectional study. The cross-sectional is that I'm looking at a wide variety of a population all at one time. So if I send out a survey blast, maybe to 2,000 people, they all take it and send it back to me. That's cross-sectional. A longitudinal means I'm going to follow people for a long period of time. It could be for years even. And in some of those examples, we may look at training or mentoring to see how that impacts perhaps the culture of an organization or engagement or satisfaction. And with that, we may look at this over a 1-year period or even a 5-year period. Longitudinal, obviously, there's more risk involved because participants could drop out. Sometimes it could cost money. It could also obviously cost a lot of time. So most projects that we do are cross-sectional. When we look at sampling, this means who will be in our study. You have probability and non-probability sampling. The probability, there's a few different, actually 4 different types that we'll talk about. The simple random sampling is just that. We just cast a wide net and try to get as many different people as we can. The stratified random sampling takes a group and then divides it into smaller groups. So maybe you look at students in a certain class. So you have your original population of students, and then you want to break it into a specific smaller set. The cluster random sampling is looking at geography. So perhaps I want people from different zip codes, and that's how I decide how to pick my participants. And then the systematic sampling is where maybe I say, I want every 9th person in my participant pool. And you have a big list in Excel, and you just randomly go through and pick everybody that ends in 9. The non-probability sampling doesn't involve random selection at all. It's more of a convenience sampling or a purposeful sampling. So with this, many times we use a snowball sampling where we ask them to recommend someone else for the study. For example, if I'm going to use, if I'm a teacher and I'm just going to use all the students I've ever taught, that's pretty convenient. And then if I ask them to send my survey to people they know, that's snowball. Now, if I want to be purposive, then I'm, just like I said, more purposeful in who I'm selecting. So perhaps my study is based on healthcare workers. Then I'm going to select all healthcare workers and try to get as many of them as I can. Okay, so as an example with your survey instrument, and these can be called instruments, surveys, or questionnaires, here's a list that I have. So at the top here, you see Employee Engagement Index. That measures employee engagement. The Fruit of the Spirit scale measures love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and so on. The Minnesota Satisfaction Questionnaire has 20 different variables or subscales. So when you're writing those hypotheses, you would include all these subscales in your hypothesis if you're using that instrument. Now, we obviously wouldn't use all these instruments in one research project, but you would want a dependent variable, in this case, maybe employee engagement, and you'd want an independent variable, which could be religious commitment or servant leadership, which would have love, altruism, empowerment, humility, serving, trust, and vision. So you'd have all of those in your hypotheses. When we pick those instruments, we want to make sure they're valid and reliable. What that means is the reliability is basically that it's consistent, that it's going to work with my project. The most popular measurement for that is the Cronbach's alpha. If it measures at 0.70 or higher, then it's deemed reliable and we can use it. Every time you do a research project, even though other people may have already measured that and deemed it reliable, you still do the measurement to see how reliable it is for your research project. As far as validity, we still want to make sure that the instrument you're using is valid. We wouldn't want to use an instrument that talks about ice cream to measure servant leadership. It's not valid. So to do that, we look at 4 different aspects. The face validity, that just looking at it at face value, is this instrument called servant leadership instrument, is it valid? If it is, we look at content validity. With that, we may bring in subject matter experts to say, okay, read the questions and tell me, does this make sense? With construct validity, we may want to pair this instrument up with another instrument that's similar to see, are we getting the same results? And then with criterion validity, we want to see how well our instrument predicts the outcome for another. All right. So overall, I hope this has helped you with your statistics fears at the doctoral level. I think before you know it, you'll be graduating and this will be water under the bridge and you'll think, hey, statistics wasn't that bad. So I hope it is. I'd love to hear your feedback. Take care.